I stood at the luxury yacht dock, watching my father deliberately cross my name off the guest list and replace it with our housekeeper. "You don't deserve to be on this trip," he sneered in front of dozens of wealthy strangers. "You've never belonged in this family." My half-sister Allison laughed, flipping her hair as she boarded the gleaming $5 million yacht. "Go home, Christine. This is for real family only." Curious onlookers whispered and stared. Some looked at me with pity, others with judgment. This was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became my public execution. But here's what they didn't know. I didn't come to this dock by accident. I came because I'd spent 20 years building something they could never imagine. While they lived off inherited money and stolen wealth, I'd clawed my way from hotel receptionist to owner of a logistics empire, with the help of a mentor who saw in me what my own father refused to see. And that yacht they were boarding so smugly, the one they thought they'd rented for their exclusive vacation, I owned it. Before my father could finish his victory speech about how I'd never amount to anything, the ship's captain descended. The gangway walked directly past my family, stopped in front of me, and bowed. "Welcome aboard, Madam Owner. Your yacht is ready." The look on my father's face, priceless. But that was just the beginning. Because over the next 3 days at sea, I would expose every lie, every crime, and every dark secret my family had buried, including the attempted murder they thought they'd gotten away with. By the time we returned to shore, they would understand one simple truth. You should never underestimate the daughter you threw away. My name is Christine Lee. I'm 37 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've built a career in logistics and commercial real estate that would surprise anyone who knew me as the discarded daughter of the Lee family. But standing at the Marina del Rey yacht dock on that brilliant Saturday morning, watching my father publicly erase my name from a guest list, I wasn't surprised at all. I was ready. The Mediterranean sun glinted off the water as I approached the boarding area, my heels clicking against the polished wooden planks. I'd received the invitation 3 weeks ago, a formal card embossed with gold lettering, "Join us for a family celebration aboard the Azure Dream." My father's secretary had called to confirm my attendance, asked about dietary restrictions, even mentioned that Allison was so excited to spend quality time together. I should have known better. The Lee family didn't do quality time, they did calculated cruelty. I spotted them before they saw me. Richard Lee stood near the yacht's boarding ramp, his silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the cream linen suit he reserved for impressing other people's money. My half-sister Allison posed beside him in a designer sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her phone angled for the perfect Instagram shot. They were surrounded by other wealthy families, the kind of people who measured their worth in yacht footage and vacation home zip codes. Then I heard it. My father's voice, louder than necessary, carried across the dock with the precise projection of a man who wanted an audience. No, there's been a change to the manifest," he was saying to the dock attendant, his pen slashing through something on the clipboard. "Christine Lee is no longer joining us. We're bringing Marta instead, our housekeeper. Much better company, frankly." The words hit exactly as he'd intended them to, like a slap delivered in public, designed to sting and humiliate. Several nearby guests turned to look, their conversations faltering. I watched a woman in a wide-brimmed hat lean toward her husband and whisper something behind her hand. A teenager loading designer luggage onto a neighboring yacht actually stopped to stare. I kept walking. Each step was measured deliberate. I'd learned a long time ago that the only way to survive the Lee family was to refuse them the satisfaction of seeing you break. "Christine doesn't fit our family image." Richard continued, his voice dripping with the particular condescension he'd perfected over decades. "Some people simply aren't meant for this lifestyle." Allison laughed, that high tinkling sound she'd cultivated since prep school. "Honestly, Daddy, I don't know why we even bothered inviting her in the first place." That's when I saw Marta. She stood slightly behind my father, wearing a simple floral dress I recognized from the Macy's clearance rack, her work-worn hands clutching a small canvas bag. But it wasn't her clothes that caught my attention. It was her face. She looked stricken, unable to meet anyone's eyes, her shoulders hunched as though she wished she could disappear. For a moment, I saw myself at 17, desperate to be invisible whenever Richard decided to remind me that I didn't belong. "Go home, Christine," Allison said when she finally noticed me approaching. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "This is for real family only." I stopped about 10 feet from them, close enough to be heard clearly, but far enough to maintain what some might call a strategic distance. The morning sun was behind me, and I knew without checking that it cast me in a kind of backlit glow that made it hard to see my expression clearly. I'd chosen my position carefully, just as I'd chosen my outfit, a simple navy sheath dress that whispered expensive rather than screaming it, paired with understated jewelry that had cost more than my first car but looked almost modest. "Is that so?" I said quietly. My voice was steady, almost pleasant. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. Richard turned fully toward me then, and for just a second, so brief I might have imagined it, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, maybe, or recognition that something wasn't quite right. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the contemptuous sneer I'd known my entire life. "What are you even doing here?" he demanded. "I specifically had you removed from the list. This is a private family vacation, and you're not—" "Not what?" I interrupted softly. "Not family. You know what I mean." His jaw tightened. "You've never understood how to conduct yourself appropriately. You've never fit in with our circle. Frankly, having you there would be an embarrassment." The words should have hurt. Once they would have devastated me. But I'd learned something important over the past 2 decades. The opinions of small men only matter if you let them. A woman standing nearby, designer sunglasses, tennis bracelet, that look of carefully maintained wealth, leaned toward her companion and whispered, "Isn't that Christine Lee? I swear I've seen her at the Coastal Development Conference." Her friend squinted at me. "Oh my God, you're right. She spoke on that panel about sustainable logistics. Wait, is she related to Richard Lee?" I didn't acknowledge them, but I filed away their recognition. It was starting just as I'd planned. Richard's expression darkened. "What can you do, Christine? You're nobody. You have no power here. This is my vacation, my yacht rental, my family. Now leave before I have security escort you off the dock." That's when I felt him arrive beside me. Mr. Thompson moved with the quiet dignity of a man who'd spent 40 years in prestigious law firms, his presence somehow both unassuming and absolutely unmissable. He was exactly where I'd asked him to be, exactly when I needed him. "Are you ready, Ms. Lee?" he asked quietly, just loud enough for Richard to hear the formal address. Richard's eyes narrowed, flicking between us. "Who the hell are you?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I took 3 steps closer to my father, close enough that my next words would be for him alone. The nearby guests couldn't hear, but they watched with the riveted attention of people who sensed drama about to unfold. "I came here to see if you'd do the right thing," I said softly, meeting his eyes. "I gave you one last chance to be a decent human being. You didn't take it." "What can you do?" he sneered. "You're nobody." I smiled then. Not a big smile, nothing theatrical, just a small, knowing curve of my lips that I knew would unsettle him more than any argument could. "You're about to find out." That's when I heard the footsteps on the boarding ramp. Captain Williams, I knew his name, of course, because I'd personally approved his hiring 6 months ago, descended with the crisp efficiency of a man who'd spent 30 years in maritime service. His white uniform was immaculate, his bearing professional, his purpose clear. He walked past Richard, past Allison, past all the confused, watching guests. He stopped directly in front of me, and then he bowed a respectful, formal bow that acknowledged not just my presence, but my authority. "Welcome aboard, Madam Owner," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent dock. "Your yacht is ready." The silence that followed Captain Williams's announcement stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then chaos erupted around me in waves of shocked voices and frantic whispers, but I remained perfectly still, watching Richard's face cycle through disbelief, confusion, and finally a fury so raw it actually satisfied something deep inside me I hadn't known needed satisfying. "This is impossible," he sputtered. his carefully maintained composure cracking like thin ice. "There must be some mistake. I rented this yacht. I have a contract." "You have a booking, sir," Captain Williams corrected with polite firmness. "Made through our charter service. The owner has every right to be present on her own vessel." Allison grabbed Richard's arm, her voice rising to a pitch that made nearby guests wince. "Daddy, what is she talking about? How can Christine own anything?" I could have drawn it out, could have made them suffer through explanations and revelations piece by painful piece. But Mr. Thompson had advised me that dignity was more powerful than drama, and he was right. So I simply gestured toward the boarding ramp. "Shall we?" I said. "I believe we have a departure schedule to keep." The next hour was a masterclass in controlled chaos. While Richard and Allison huddled with their luggage making frantic phone calls to lawyers who would eventually confirm what they already knew, I walked through my yacht with Marta beside me. She hadn't said a word since Captain Williams's announcement, but her hand trembled slightly when I linked my arm through hers. "I don't understand," she whispered as we climbed to the main deck. "How is this possible, mija?" The Spanish endearment my girl nearly broke my composure. But I needed to explain, needed her to understand how we'd arrived at this moment. So as the yacht pulled away from the dock and Marina del Rey became a shrinking line of lights behind us, I told her my story. I was 18 when I left Richard's house with nothing but a duffel bag and $300 I'd saved from babysitting jobs. He'd made his position clear that final morning. "You'll never amount to anything, Christine. You don't have what it takes to survive in the real world." I'd believed him for about 6 months. Those first months were brutal, sleeping on friends' couches, working double shifts at a diner while taking classes at community college, learning that being broke and being broken were two very different things. At 22, I was working as a night receptionist at the Ocean View Hotel when everything changed. It was 2 a.m. when Florence Hartley walked through the lobby doors, elegant, even in her obvious distress. She'd been mugged 3 blocks away, her purse snatched, her phone gone, her wallet dropped in the struggle. I found it on my break, tucked against a planter where the thief had apparently discarded it after taking the cash. Inside was her ID, credit cards, family photos. $800 in my hand would have meant 2 months of rent security. Instead, I called the number on her business card and waited in the lobby until she arrived to collect it. "Why didn't you keep it?" she'd asked, studying me with those sharp blue eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. "Because it's not mine," I'd answered simply. She smiled, then sad and knowing. "You remind me of someone I loved very much." That night began a relationship that would reshape my entire life. Florence Hartley had built a logistics empire through ruthless intelligence and uncompromising integrity, and she had no children to inherit her life's work. She didn't offer me charity, she offered me opportunity. She taught me how to read financial reports, how to identify undervalued commercial properties, how to build businesses that created value rather than extracting it. Within 5 years, I was managing one of her subsidiary companies. Within 10, I was her business partner. And when she passed away 18 months ago, she left me everything along with a letter that explained why she'd chosen me over countless other, more obvious candidates. "Because you reminded me what goodness looks like in a world that often rewards the opposite." "But Marta," I said, turning to face her as the yacht's engines hummed beneath us, "there's something else you need to know. Something I've wanted to tell you for 20 years. Her weathered face creased with concern. "What is it, mija?" I took her hands in mine. "Do you remember when I was 7 years old, when Richard's first wife locked me in the basement after I spilled juice on Allison's dress?" Marta's eyes filled instantly with tears. "Dios mío, I will never forget. You were so small, so hurt. You came down those stairs after everyone was asleep." I continued, my own voice thickening with emotion. "You brought me food. You cleaned my cuts. You sang to me in Spanish until I stopped shaking." "You were just a baby," she whispered. "How could I not? For the past 15 years, whenever my businesses did well, whenever I closed a deal or made a profit, I sent money to an account. Different amounts, different times. Always with the same note, for the kindness you showed a little girl. Marta, that was me. That was always me." Her hands flew to her mouth as understanding crashed over her.
The anonymous donor she'd wondered about, prayed for, tried unsuccessfully to thank it, had been the little girl she'd comforted in a basement, grown into a woman who never forgot. "Mi angel," she sobbed, pulling me into her arms. "My angel came back." Mr. Thompson found us there holding each other as the California coastline drifted past. He cleared his throat gently, and when we separated, his eyes held a warmth that made him look less like an attorney and more like a proud grandfather. "There's something else you should know about this yacht," he said.
Its original name was Harrison's Dream. It belonged to the family your father and sister defrauded 15 years ago. Florence purchased it from Elena Harrison after her husband's suicide, paid well above market value to help her start over. She renamed it Second Chances and had it completely renovated. Richard doesn't recognize it. That's how thorough Florence was. She wanted you to have it not just as an asset, but as a symbol. The very thing your family's cruelty destroyed, rebuilt by a woman who believed in redemption. I walked to the railing and looked down at the main lounge where I could see Richard pacing and Allison scrolling frantically through her phone. They still didn't understand. They thought this was about money, about ownership, about winning some petty family dispute. They had no idea what was really coming. I picked up the intercom handset, my thumb hovering over the button. Captain Williams had set our course 3 days at sea before returning to port. 3 days to deliver justice, served cold and clear. "Attention all guests," I said, my voice carrying through every speaker on the yacht. "Dinner will be served at 7 p.m. Dress code is formal. And one more thing." I paused, watching through the windows as Richard's head snapped up toward the nearest speaker. "Tonight, we'll discuss the real reason you're all here." The reactions to my announcement were immediate and predictable. Through the deck windows, I watched Richard storm toward the main stairwell while Allison hurried after him, her designer heels clicking against the polished floors. But they wouldn't find me in the common areas. I had other preparations to make, and the beauty of owning the yacht meant I controlled every aspect of their experience, down to which rooms they'd sleep in tonight. Captain Williams met me near the owner's suite with a subtle nod. "The room assignments have been made according to your specifications, Ms. Lee." "Thank you, Captain. And the seating arrangements for dinner, exactly as you requested." By 6 o'clock, Richard and Allison had discovered their accommodations. I was in the main salon reviewing documents with Mr. Thompson when Allison's voice echoed down the corridor, shrill with indignation. "This is the smallest cabin on the entire yacht. There's barely room for our luggage." A crew member's response was perfectly courteous. "My apologies, ma'am, but as standard guests, this is the appropriate accommodation. The VIP suite has been reserved for Ms. Marta, and the owner's suite is, of course, occupied by Ms. Lee." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ocean against the hull. Then came Richard's voice, low and dangerous. "This is unacceptable. Move that woman out of the VIP suite immediately." "I'm afraid that's not possible, sir." The crew member replied, his tone unchanged. "Ms. Lee has designated Ms. Marta as her honored guest. Maritime protocol requires we respect the owner's wishes." I waited in the salon knowing Richard would come. He appeared in the doorway within minutes, his face flushed with anger, barely contained by years of practiced social grace. "Christine, this has gone far enough. Whatever point you're trying to make, I'm not making a point, Richard." I interrupted calmly, not bothering to look up from the financial report I was reviewing. "I'm simply running my yacht according to established protocols. Marta has been more family to me than you ever were. She deserves the best accommodations available. She's a housekeeper. She's a woman who showed kindness to a terrified child. That makes her royalty in my book." I finally met his eyes. "Humiliation is an interesting feeling, isn't it? You should know. You're an expert at inflicting it." He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and stalked away. I allowed myself a small smile. The evening had barely begun. Dinner was served at 7 sharp in the formal dining room where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the darkening Pacific. The table had been set for 5 myself. At the head, Mr. Thompson to my right, Marta to my left, and Richard and Allison relegated to the far end. The crew served Marta first, as I'd instructed, and I watched Allison's jaw tighten with each course that bypassed her. We were halfway through the main course when I decided it was time. I placed my fork down with deliberate care, and the small sound somehow commanded everyone's attention. I want to tell you about something that happened 5 years ago. I began, my voice conversational. I was driving home from a business meeting in San Diego when my brakes failed. The car was only 2 years old, regularly maintained. I crashed into a highway barrier at 60 miles per hour. Marta gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. She hadn't known about this. The police investigation concluded it was mechanical failure, faulty brake line, they said. But I always wondered. I reached beneath my chair and lifted a small wooden box onto the table. Recently, a retired mechanic named Donald Reeves contacted me. He has stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 months to live, maybe less, and he wanted to clear his conscience before he died. Allison had gone very still, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. He told me an interesting story. I opened the box, revealing a severed brake line sealed in plastic. About how a young woman paid him $5,000 in cash to cut this. How she gave him my license plate number and the location where my car was usually parked. How she told him it needed to look like an accident. The color drained from Allison's face. That's insane. That's a complete lie. I have his confession on tape. I continued pulling a small recording device from my pocket. I have bank records showing a $5,000 withdrawal from your account on the exact date he specified. And I have this. I slid a printed email across the table. Sent from your personal account to Richard. The problem will be solved soon. Don't worry. Richard grabbed the email, his hands shaking slightly as he read. You have no proof. This means what you're suggesting. The statute of limitations for attempted murder in California is 6 years, I said calmly. This happened 5 years ago. Donald's deathbed confession, combined with the financial records and your own written communication, is more than sufficient for prosecution. Allison's wineglass slipped from her fingers, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. It wasn't supposed to. You weren't supposed to die, I finished for her. No, I'm sure you hoped I'd just be badly injured, scared away. Maybe disabled enough that I'd stop being whatever threat you imagined I posed to your inheritance. We don't have to listen to this, Richard said, pushing back from the table. This is harassment. Sit down, I commanded, and something in my voice made him freeze. Because we're not done. I also hired a forensic accounting firm to audit your company. They found some fascinating irregularities. $2.3 million embezzled from partner funds, forged signatures on asset transfers, 8 years of systematic tax evasion through falsified offshore accounts. The silence in the dining room was absolute, except for the gentle roll of the waves. I've already filed a whistleblower report with the IRS, I continued. Your former partners, the ones you defrauded, have been contacted. Several are considering civil litigation. Your company, Richard, is about to collapse under the weight of its own corruption. And I didn't have to do anything except tell the truth. Richard's face had gone from red to gray. You're destroying us. No, I said quietly. You destroyed yourselves. I'm simply making sure everyone knows about it. I stood then, walking around the table, until I stood directly in front of my father. He looked smaller, somehow diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical stature. You told me I'd never amount to anything, I said, and despite my best efforts, my voice trembled slightly with emotion. But here's the truth, Dad. You were right about one thing. I'm not your daughter anymore. Richard's face went pale. What do you mean? I leaned forward close enough that only he could hear my next words. Ask yourself, why did you really abandon me? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications Richard couldn't yet grasp. But he would. In the next few minutes, everything he thought he knew about control and power would shatter like crystal against stone. Mr. Thompson rose from his seat, reaching into his leather briefcase to extract a yellowed envelope sealed with red wax. The paper was old enough that I could see its brittleness even from where I stood. He placed it on the table between Richard and me with the solemnity of a judge delivering a verdict. This envelope contains DNA test results dated 28 years ago. Mr. Thompson said, his attorney's voice stripped of all warmth. Results that Richard Lee obtained when Christine was 7 years old. Richard's face went from gray to white. Don't Christine is not your biological daughter." Mr. Thompson continued his words precise and devastating. "She is the child of her mother's first husband, a man named James Hartley. A good man by all accounts, a man you envy deeply because your wife never stopped loving his memory." The dining room seemed to tilt beneath me. I gripped the back of Richard's chair, my knuckles going white. I'd suspected something was wrong, had always felt like an outsider, but hearing it stated so plainly was like having the ground removed from beneath my feet. When Christine's mother died giving birth, she left letters expressing hope that her daughter would grow up with her first husband's integrity rather than being corrupted by wealth, Mr. Thompson said. Richard found those letters when Christine was 7. He conducted a DNA test in secret and confirmed what the letters suggested. Rather than handle this with any dignity, he chose to hide the truth and make Christine's life a living hell, systematically breaking down a child to ensure she'd eventually leave and take nothing with her. "You knew," I whispered, and my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. "You knew I wasn't yours, and you still treated me like I was worthless. You let me believe for 30 years that I was your daughter, that there was something wrong with me that made you hate me." Richard's jaw worked soundlessly. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold enough to frost glass. "Why would I waste my time on someone else's mistake? Your mother trapped me in that marriage with her grief over a dead man. When I found out you weren't even mine, I saw no reason to pretend you mattered." Marta made a sound like a wounded animal. Allison stared at her father as though seeing a stranger. "But here's what you didn't know," Mr. Thompson said, pulling a second document from his briefcase. This one was newer, wrapped in a blue folder embossed with a law firm's gold lettering. Florence Hartley wasn't just Christine's mentor. She was James Hartley's sister, Christine's paternal aunt. The world tilted again, but this time in a different direction. I sank into the nearest chair, my legs refusing to support me. Florence spent 15 years searching for her brother's daughter. Mr. Thompson continued gently. When she met Christine at that hotel, she recognized her brother's eyes immediately. She secretly obtained a DNA sample from a hairbrush Christine had touched, confirmed the relationship but chose not to reveal it. She wanted Christine to develop her own strength, her own character before learning about the inheritance. She tested her niece through business challenges, through ethical dilemmas, watching to see if James's daughter had inherited his integrity. He handed me a small wooden box I hadn't seen him carrying. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were photographs, a man with my eyes, my chin, my smile standing beside a young Florence, and beneath the photos, a letter in Florence's elegant handwriting. "My dearest Christine," I read aloud, my voice breaking. "You were never alone. You were always loved. Every day I watched you grow into the woman my brother would have been so proud of. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive, but I needed you to know your own worth before you knew your birthright. You are a Hartley, my darling girl. You always were. With all my love, Aunt Florence." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, the first I'd cried in 20 years. Marta moved to my side immediately, her arms around me, and I let myself break just a little in the embrace of the only mother I'd ever really known. When I finally looked up, Mr. Thompson was holding 2 envelopes, one red and one white. "Florence left you with a choice," he said quietly. "The red envelope contains complete evidence packages for law enforcement. Everything needed to prosecute Richard and Allison for fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement, and attempted murder. Criminal charges, prison time, complete destruction." He held up the white envelope. "This contains a settlement agreement. They transfer company ownership to you, repay all stolen funds publicly, apologize to the Harrison family, and work as contract employees in your company for 2 years to learn what integrity means. No prison, but they live with their shame while working for the woman they tried to destroy." "Florence believed in justice," Mr. Thompson said, "but also in giving people enough rope to either save themselves or hang themselves. She wanted you to choose based on the person you've become, not the pain they caused." I stood slowly, taking both envelopes. Richard and Allison watched me with the terrified attention of people watching a judge deliberate on their fate. "Please," Richard said, his voice cracking. "Christine, we're family. Family." The word came out sharp as broken glass. "You made sure I was never family." I held both envelopes, feeling their weight. Florence had taught me that revenge was a dish best served cold. But mercy! I looked at the white envelope, then at the red. Mercy was only for those who deserved it. I opened the red envelope, pulling out the thick stack of documentation inside. "Florence taught me something else, too," I said slowly. "She taught me that some people need to face real consequences before they can even begin to change." Richard dropped to his knees, his carefully maintained dignity finally shattering. "Please, we'll do anything. Anything." I met his eyes. "Then let's see if you can survive the truth." The red envelope's contents spread across the table like the evidence they were, but I didn't hand them over immediately. There was one more piece of this puzzle that Richard and Allison needed to see one final message from the woman who'd orchestrated this entire reckoning. "Before I make my final decision," I said, walking to the dining room's entertainment console, "there's something Florence wanted you to see. I inserted a USB drive Mr. Thompson had given me that morning, and the large screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. Florence's face appeared filmed in what I recognized as her study, the one with the leather chairs and the view of the bay. She looked tired, but composed, her blue eyes sharp as ever. "Richard Allison." Florence's recorded voice filled the room. "You don't know me, but I know you. I'm Florence Hartley, sister of James Hartley, the man whose daughter you destroyed. You thought you could steal her inheritance, break her spirit, and discard her like trash. You were wrong." Richard's face had gone completely bloodless. Allison sat frozen, her mascara running in dark streams down her cheeks. "Christine is not just my niece," Florence continued. "She is my legacy. I made sure she has everything she needs to bring you to justice. This yacht you're sitting on, it was purchased with the very money you stole from the Harrison family. Karma, Mr. Lee, has a way of coming full circle." She leaned forward slightly, and her expression softened into something almost like pity. "You have two choices: face the law and lose everything, or voluntarily surrender your company, repay every stolen dollar, and disappear from Christine's life forever. Choose wisely, because justice doesn't need Christine to be cruel. It just needs her to be honest." The screen went dark. Florence's gentle smile, the last thing visible, before it faded to black. In the silence that followed, I could hear Allison's broken sobs and the ocean waves against the hull. I placed the white envelope on the table alongside the red one. "Florence taught me that real power isn't about vengeance. It's about using strength to create justice." I pulled out the settlement agreement Mr. Thompson and I had prepared. "Here are your options. You can sign this agreement voluntarily, or I can hand these prosecution files to law enforcement the moment we dock." "What does the agreement say?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You transfer 100% of company ownership to me to prevent any further fraud. You repay the $2.3 million you embezzled through a court-supervised payment plan. You publish a formal apology to the Harrison family in the Los Angeles Times and the Wall Street Journal. You accept a lifetime no-contact order, and you work as entry-level temporary employees in my restructured company for 2 years, learning what honest labor actually means." I met his eyes. "Any refusal triggers immediate criminal prosecution for everything we've uncovered." "You can't force us to sign under duress," Allison said desperately. "I'm not forcing anything," I replied calmly. "You have 24 hours to decide voluntarily. Mr. Thompson is a neutral witness. This is a choice, Allison. Consequences always are." They signed 6 hours later, their hands shaking as they put pen to paper. But I'd meant what I said about justice running its course. When I excused myself to make a phone call, it was to contact the district attorney's office in Los Angeles County. I provided Donald Reeves's contact information, offered to make his deathbed confession available, and explained that I'd be filing a formal complaint regarding the attempted murder. The settlement agreement covered civil matters and corporate fraud, but Allison's attempt on my life was criminal, and no contract could erase that. When we docked 3 days later, 2 police officers were waiting at the marina. I watched from the upper deck as they approached. Allison showed their badges and asked her to come with them for questioning. She looked back at Richard, desperate and terrified, but he couldn't meet her eyes. For the first time in their lives, his money and influence couldn't protect her from the consequences of her own actions. 6 months have passed since that voyage. Richard works in a warehouse now moving inventory boxes and living in a studio apartment in Van Nuys. His wages are garnished to repay the embezzled funds. Allison is awaiting trial, her bail set high enough that Richard can't afford it, even if he wanted to help. Her husband divorced her within weeks of her arrest, and her former social circle evaporated like morning fog. Marta lives in a cottage I bought for her in Laguna Beach, right on the water, where she can watch the sunset every evening. She manages the yacht's operations with the same quiet competence she brought to everything, finally receiving the respect and dignity she always deserved. Marcus was promoted to operations director of my logistics division, his loyalty rewarded with real opportunity. And the yacht, I renamed it Florence's Promise, a testament to the woman who saw potential in a broken girl returning a lost wallet. This evening, Marta and I stand on the deck together, the California sky painted in shades of gold and rose. She takes my hand, her weathered fingers warm against mine. "Are you happy now, my dear?" she asks softly. I think about the question carefully. I'm not happy, Marta. I'm free, and that's more than I ever dreamed of. I squeeze her hand. To anyone who's ever been told they're not good enough, you are. You always were. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming everything they said you couldn't be. We sail into the sunset, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm sailing towards something rather than away from it. Later that week, a white envelope arrives at my office. Inside is an old photograph, Florence standing beside a young woman who bears a striking resemblance to me. On the back, in Florence's handwriting, there's one more truth I never told you. I hold the photograph up to the light, studying the mysterious woman's face, and smile. "Oh, Florence," I whisper, "you always did love a good mystery." So that's how a daughter who was told she'd never amount to anything became the owner of the very yacht her family tried to exclude her from. Christine's story reminds us that sometimes the best response to cruelty isn't louder. Cruelty, it's quiet success and dignified justice. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in Christine's position, would you have chosen the red envelope or the white envelope? Would you have given Richard and Allison a chance to make things right? Or would you have gone straight to the authorities? And what do you think that mysterious photograph means? Could Florence have one more secret waiting to be revealed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge served cold and justice served right, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another tale of people who refuse to stay down when life knocked them over. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.